Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Sally here, and this is Headspace for the Workplace. It's a podcast on how to cultivate vibrant and psychologically safe and healthy workplaces. I'm your host, and our goal today is to talk about the underbelly of the recovery center business model. Now, if you've worked with me, you know that I always say if you're building a suite of services for your workforce, don't Google. Why is that? Because when you Google to search for your resources, what comes to the top? The people who paid the most for your advertising dollars. So that's what we're going to unpack today, why that's not a best practice. And I have with me here Chris Thompson from Sober Sidekick. Chris, say hi.
Hey there. Glad to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have crossed paths with you. You were a big part of our Construction Working Mind Summit, and every time I talk with you, I get really inspired. Chris, what are the two main takeaways that our people listening today are going to walk away with?
Yeah, I hope you walk away with some skepticism and the realization that recovery happens outside of rehab. No one gets fixed in 30 days. And this is about the lifelong journey here.
Love it. Love it. So tell us a little bit about what you do every day.
Yeah, so I am the founder, CEO of Sober Sidekick. It's become the world's largest peer support community digitally for people in recovery, coming up on 500,000 total members. And I'm super grateful I get to do this every day because I used to be someone who was chronically battling addiction every day. And now I get to be on the other side of that. And, my day-to-day, I wish I got to be more in the weeds on the tech side, which is how it started for me. But, really my day-to-day today, it's about thinking strategically about how we can get this to more people. 500,000 is just a drop in the bucket when it comes to how big and unaddressed this problem is. And our mission at Sober Sidekick is we want to scale the most epic wave of real life comeback stories the world has ever seen.
What a tagline. What a tagline. Yes. And I'm a huge fan of your work for so many reasons. The way that you center it on peer support and lived experience, the ease of accessibility. It's a genius model. And you've just really scaled this so quickly, which speaks to the hunger for this work. What's something surprising that when people find out about you, they're like, whoa, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I spent the first 2 years of this company living in a sober living halfway house while sharing a room with multiple other men. So this platform was truly, truly built from experience while in the experience. And when I built this platform, I didn't plan to build a company. I just knew there was a huge gap and it needed to be filled. And turns out the gap was so big that something that I was able to build with limited resources and while living in a halfway house turned out to be so meaningful. And to me, that I didn't take that as like, oh, I must be a really good developer. I took that as, wow, this is truly, truly unaddressed. That no group more professional and talented than me has tried to solve this problem in a similar way. And where I'm great. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and I can't think of a better birthplace for something like this, really coming out of this huge and important meaning-making process. And that's, I think, where some of the best inspiration lies, not outside in the academic ivory tower, but from the grit of people's lived experience. So I'm grateful that you were able to do this. Share
Absolutely.
a little bit more about your story and how that led you to that moment.
Yeah. So my field research on substance abuse started in when I was 21. Actually, my first drink came at 19, but and when I say field research, I mean my chronic addiction. It really picked up when I was 21. Had a traumatic situation happened, and not almost overnight, alcohol became not my problem, but my only solution. And that's what I would say with anyone who's in overcoming substance abuse is alcohol is not their problem. It's the only solution they found that has worked for them regarding their trauma, regarding, depression, anxiety, neglect, all these different things. Alcohol, drugs have been the only solution that has worked for them up to that point. And, it took me realizing and understanding that to finally for it to click what my recovery needed to look like and the things that needed to be addressed in order for me to recover and stay sober, because I had gotten sober for 30 days multiple times, many times before I'd stayed sober for 60 days. And every time, it was worse than it ever was before. And, it was, incomprehensible how bad it got, but then it was also incomprehensible how bad I felt when I was sober. At that point in time, there's this idea that you get sober and all your problems go away. That's just not true. And getting sober and not addressing your problems, that only makes it even worse. So I was caught in that cycle for a little bit. And then finally, Thanksgiving Day 2018, I hit my rock bottom where I had woken up on the sidewalk for the fourth day in a row, wearing hospital pants, didn't remember being in the hospital, no phone, no wallet. It had rained the night before, and, sitting there realizing it's Thanksgiving Day and this is where my life is. And I'm 24 at that point in time. And, I was just 3 years removed from being a good college student, being an athlete, even doing a startup while I was in. So it was just like a steep fall.
I was going to say, because 19 is kind of late for first drink. When we look at the trajectory into addiction, it's usually people who started drinking in their early childhood, even, they're 9, 10, 11, 12. So that was, you found it and just right off the cliff.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it wasn't immediately off the cliff, but there was one, traumatic situation that, and it was traumatic for about 9 months straight, or 9 months to a year straight, where it was over that period of time where alcohol became my solution. That's, and I think that's true for anyone who's in recovery. It's a solution. Alcohol, drugs are a solution for trauma.
Yes. And people don't realize how many people living with addiction have underlying significant trauma. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So now talk a little bit about kind of how the birth of Sober Sidekick fills the gap as you see it, and what you went through to realize that this gap needed to be filled.
Yeah. So, I'm alive because the right people showed up for me at the right time, Thanksgiving Day 2018, and gave me hope in a way that I hadn't felt it before. And I had tried therapy. I had tried, different things. I had gone to rehab. But these peers were able to give me hope in a way that no one had ever done up to that point, and gave me hope that that day could be day one of my comeback story. And 30 days into my recovery journey, while living in the sober living, the halfway house, I was really reflecting on how grateful I was for those connections I had made, and how lucky I was to have made those connections at that point in time, and wanted to build a platform where connecting with the right person at the right time is no longer up to chance. And started building Sober Sidekick. And 30 days later, Apple approved a shitty MVP and a shitty first version in the App Store. And I really wasn't expecting much out of it. I was just happy to have completed a project. It was just that's all it was to me, was a project that felt meaningful. And day one, people like, and the question any app developer goes through when they're releasing something is like, will anyone use this for one? And then even more foundational, will even my friends use this? And what was amazing to me was seeing day one people who weren't my friends, who didn't even know a friend of me, find this in the app store and start supporting each other. And that's really what that was what showed me that there's something real here. And if this can have any sort of impact on people I never would have met 30 with only 30 days of work, imagine what this could be if I were to fully focus on it. So I was all in from that point on.
Excellent.
And yeah.
Well, and what you have uncovered is kind of a real disturbing part of the recovery treatment world, which is that there is a profit-driven underbelly. And I wasn't joking when I told my clients, I'm like, do not Google this stuff because there's nothing more disheartening. And I know people Google because they're panicked and they just want a quick answer. But there's nothing more disheartening than finally getting your loved one into what you believe is going to save the day, only to have your entire savings account siphoned, and then no one's getting better. So tell us what you mean by this takeaway about be skeptical.
And first off, anything I say, you could Google body brokering and you would be able to read stories that reflect, aren't maybe the same stories I'm sharing today, but you'll be able to see stories in the New York Times or in other publications talking about these same things that are happening, because sometimes when I share these things, it sounds too wild to believe. But one thing to take note of is in terms of reimbursement rates for rehab, for health insurers, they're only reimbursing cancer patients at a higher cancer clinics at a higher rate than they're reimbursing per member per day for rehab. So this means, like, let's say your son or daughter who needs help, depending on what recruiter you're talking to and depending on how they're incentivized, they see your son as a $250,000 check walking around with a $30K bonus to me for getting you into the door. And that's called body brokering, which is illegal. Problem with it is it's so hard to track. And I have friends of mine who have been offered like they've referred someone out of good faith. And then the owner has said, hey, if you have more people you can refer me, I'll sign you up as a life coach and I'll pay you $20K a month if you have more people. So these are so behind the scenes, very difficult to track. The FBI has called this a rampant issue. There are literally human trafficking laws that have been written specifically for this population. And the reason why there's human trafficking laws is when you look at what happens when people with no credentials and no business being in the space getting paid $10,000 to $15,000 a head to get people into treatment. If anyone can enter that space and that's how much you're getting paid, then the kinds of people who enter that aren't going to be that great. Or the kinds of people who launch businesses, I would say inpatient rehabs, it's one of the easiest industries to enter in healthcare. It's the get rich quick scheme of healthcare. So to that end, I know of people who have brokers on reservations in Oklahoma buying healthcare policies and sometimes life insurance policies without the knowledge of the family, shipping them out to LA to rinse and repeat them through their rehabs as many times as they can until their insurance will no longer reimburse. And, so it's actually more of an eyebrow raiser if the rehab isn't asking you to pay anything than if they are, is what I've learned. Because the rehabs who don't ask you to pay anything, for one, that's inducement, but two, the levels of fraud that they're doing behind the scenes to make this, there was fraud run on my insurance for 2 years without my knowledge by a provider I wasn't even at. He
Wow.
was just, that provider had a deal with the sober living I was at where, they own multiple sober livings in the town where anytime someone runs a drug test, a UA, a piss test, send them to me so I can bill their insurance. And without my knowledge, so my insurance card was shared with him, and without my knowledge, my insurance was billed $500 per test, like 3 tests a week for 2 years. And I only found out about it when I got a call from collections when my insurance lapsed. And these are the things that go on in broad daylight. And these are the things that are actually more common with the rehabs that have, the highest paid staff, even sometimes highest paid clinicians and, best facilities and, best resources. They have a pool, they have a gym, because of how much fraud they can get away with and in some scenarios, like paying people to come back. And there's plenty of articles you can Google about that, about someone's mom whose son overdosed, who she got her son in the rehab, and then she didn't know that the recruiter then ended up paying them to come back. And they started going to rehab as a job to fund their addiction. And that's how so many kids have fallen into that trap of just being, an asset. The last time I went to rehab, the only other guy who was there told me he was getting paid to be here by the admissions director. So these people are essentially financing the addiction of addicts so that they can keep coming back to those facilities until one day their insurance lapses or they overdose and die. And, if you Google body brokering, you'll hear stories of mothers sharing that happened with their child. And, and what I have to say here is our entire healthcare system is implicated in this because currently there are very few providers who are incentivized based on long-term success. And majority of providers are only incentivized for heads and beds. So for any of you business owners out there, repeat customers are better than new customers. Like that's something pretty common in business. It just happens to be, the death sentence of so many people. And, I'll say this boldly is that too many people went to rehab not knowing that they were being sent into hospice. And that is what's going on in broad daylight.
You say a lot of provocative things, but I know you're speaking the truth. And I know that the world does not know the extent to which this happens all the time. In just my brief experiences with a lot of the recovery center world, I do recognize that a lot of the workers bounce from place to place. They pop up, they shut down, they pop up, they shut down. And I think that's all indicative of this. And when I do have people go kick the tires, I say, ask them for their evidence-based outcomes. Ask them for how they know that they're helping people and see what you get back. Because a lot of times they don't have that. They just have the heads and beds kind of statistics. And that's telling. No other industry would get paid for not having outcomes, but this one often does. And
I would also add to that, like where I've been really disappointed in the past is some of the worst ones that I've come across. For instance, the one where there's a rumor that they've been buying life insurance policies on their own patients. Those ones actually will provide you with outcomes. It's just I wouldn't say fabricated, but they're written they're a nothing burger that you wouldn't know without being a data scientist or like, someone who studies outcomes in this space. And, so what I would say is like, the good ones are actually really good at giving you compelling reasons of saying, here are our success rates, or here's what our alumni community looks like, or like they have really good answers for these questions. And that's what's been really disappointing for me is it's a game that it doesn't take a lot of time to learn how to play it better than the rest.
Wow. All right, let's go to your second takeaway, which is recovery happens out of rehab.
Yeah. So for one, 95% of those who complete a 30-day stay in rehab relapse within a year. So like that baffles me from the perspective of, so we're spending $50K, sometimes $100K for someone to go to rehab for 30 days. And then after that, they're on their own. Like, doesn't that sound like an inefficient use of money? Like, maybe spend a little less on the 30-day part and think about how can we support this person in the long run? Or if you think about how expensive it is once someone falls into that 30K, 30-day category, what are the things we can do before someone gets to that point? To the point where they need to go to rehab for 30 days. Because another bad news for you is once someone goes to rehab once, they will repeat 7 times on average. So, it's not just a one and done, so, if you look at, how bad the outcomes are historically for rehabs, once people get to this point, we have to recognize that recovery happens outside of rehab. And simply put, suicides, relapses, mental health crises, rarely do they ever happen during a therapy session or while someone's in a rehab or a clinic or in even an AA meeting. Like, these are things that happen when people are alone or, outside of these, institutions. So, that's been our approach with Sober Sidekick, is optimizing for those moments where people are alone. Because what I've found often, what I've learned from my own recovery journey, is that the breaking points can also be the breakthroughs. And the last time I thought I was going to drink, I walked into a liquor store, bought a bottle. I was 6 months sober at the time. And then I just sat on the curb and thought about it. And then I called someone, and that experience of going through that moment of being alone, then being reached out to by someone, then talking through it, and then walking away from it, it was the first time in my life I've ever thought I was going to drink and didn't. And that's where I say breaking points can be breakthroughs if you empower people. And, there's too much of a danger of, there's a lot of danger in, there's a lot of good things going on in behavioral health in terms of access to care, in terms of stigma, in terms of awareness. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to take away people's sense of agency and, and people's sense of ownership. An analogy I like to make is, if everyone felt like they needed a physical trainer to go to the gym, only a select group of people would go to the gym, and it would only be sometimes. And that is kind of how we treated mental health. And from that perspective, we need to think about mental fitness. We need to think about empowering people to those mental fitness, to those gyms for your mind. And the gym is also a gym for your mind, I'll add that. But going on a walk is gym for your mind, and reading books and community. And there's so many other layers of mental health beyond therapy. Therapy is good. Therapy is great. I will advocate for everyone getting therapy, but mental health therapy is just a one of the many angles, and it's an insufficient angle if we view therapy as the only solution, then it's insufficient. By far. Therapy was insufficient for me when it came to overcoming my substance abuse. So, it's recognizing that, this is a journey, this is a comeback story, this is a day-to-day practice. This is overcoming trauma. Sometimes this is overcoming generational curses. You don't know if there was sexual abuse as a child. You don't know if they had a suicide attempt 2 years ago that no one knows anything about, and they feel themselves falling back into that, and they're trying to stop themselves from falling. You don't know. Yeah, I'm definitely rambling, so I'm going to take a pause and allow Sally to pull me back on track.
No, the passion's coming through, Chris. I hear it loud and clear. So I'm going to just do a quick recap, and then I want you to give us your closing thoughts here. So we're here with Chris Thompson, the founder of Sober Sidekick, a gap-filling recovery support online peer support angle. I totally flubbed that up, but that's the gist. And we're talking about how people fall into these cycles because alcohol becomes the only solution they see in that moment to help them deal with their pain. You also talked about the importance of peers, and that peers gave you hope, and that peers every day are giving people in recovery not only hope, but I would also say the sense of community so that they know that they're not alone. You opened our eyes to this huge underbelly trend called body brokering. And so I'm sure a lot of people go out and Google that. But it's the result of a faulty system where providers are mainly incentivized for heads and beds and not for indicating the positive outcomes. We're also noticing that, part of the recovery journey is, learning about oneself, and you're going to have ebbs and flows, just like everything that you go through in your health and your well-being. But that this often comes in places when people are alone, not when they are with their therapist or in some other supporting place. So we need to be prepared to help people in these breaking moments find a support just in time. And that is what your tool does. It gives people a way to connect with someone just in time. That is an empowering message, not a shame on you, not a look at you, you're falling apart again, how terrible. But you can do this, and I'm with you. We're going to walk together. So there's just so much I love about your model, the way you think about this. Clearly, you've spoken to the hearts of so many people by how quickly this has spread. What do you want to make sure that our listeners walk away with?
If you have a friend who's battling addiction, or if you are battling addiction, here's what I believe you need to be telling yourself, which, too often, we try to motivate people to get sober based on the negative consequences. If you don't stop, you're going to lose your job. If you don't stop, you're going to die. All these different things, and all these different things I heard for years before I got sober. And honestly, only made me feel more hopeless and made me feel, and I would say that's the equivalent to if someone's hanging on the edge of a cliff, telling them to look down and think about what it's going to be like when they hit the ground, versus telling someone to look up and, tell yourself to look up, tell your family member to look up, remind them who they are and what they're capable of. And, remind them the reasons why their life is worth living and the reasons why they are worthy of loving themselves. And with that, I'll thank you, Sally, for having me on the show. And I also want to thank you for the amazing work you do, and the true champion you are for this population and many other populations. So thank you so much for having me. You're someone I deeply respect.
Right back at you. And your tagline for your company, "Recovery is a Comeback Story," I think really helps people see the future. So Thank you for believing in all the people that are struggling right now to find their footing, and being such a model and giving us tools that we can access so readily. If people want to connect with you or Sober Sidekick, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sober Sidekick, just download in the App Store, any phone, it'll work. Just search in the App Store and it'll be there. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, LinkedIn is usually the best place to find me. It's the only social network I'm active on outside of Sober Sidekick. And there's also a contact us form on sobersidekick.com.
Perfect. We'll put all that in the show notes. Thanks again, Chris, for saying yes when I asked you to be on the podcast and for your work. I feel like you're just at the beginning, man. It's just going to be so amazing where this goes and grows. Thanks to Dave for making us sound awesome, and Mitchell and Brooke and Elias and the whole team behind the podcast, helping us get this into as many ears as possible. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and try to make your workplace a more healthier and psychologically safe place to be. So in closing, working minds work well together. There's lots we can learn from each other to improve our well-being and the resilience of our workplaces. Until we meet again, take care.